I smoke cool stogies I have found, short but not too big around. I'm a man of means by no means, king of the road.
Hi, I'm Noah Gervais. In this video we're going to be taking an extended look at the new Mad Max game. We're going to talk about it in terms of the movies that preceded it and in terms of how it actually plays. It's been a divisive game with a lot of different mixed reactions, so we're going to try to figure out why those reactions have been so mixed. Let's get started. Mad Max has been influencing game design since long before the first official Mad Max title went into development. In many ways, the particular style of apocalypse that George Miller pioneered with The Road Warrior in 1981 is the default sensibility of most post-apocalyptic titles. Fallout, the first one from '97, is full of Mad Max references, right down to the design of the armors and some of the environments. Fallout 2's car, the Highwayman, would be right at home in Mad Max. Rage, id's most overlooked shooter, uses Mad Max-inspired costume and set design throughout. Even racing games, like the semi-open world Fuel, have taken cracks at the look and feel of Mad Max. There have been games with Mad Max in them for decades now, but not before right now has there been a capital-letter Mad Max game, and people's reaction to the game have been all over the map. Is this a fun, authentic expression of the series' iconic visual style, or is it a derivative mishmash of tired, overused gameplay cliches? The wide range of reactions to the game highlight its real struggle. It is both of these things. A Mad Max title that uniquely translates what I've always loved about the franchise, arranged around gameplay systems that become less and less functional over time. It's one of the most beautiful games I've played in many ways, and the things that it does take time with, the incredible detail of the game world, are incredibly compelling. But you have to know what to expect with Mad Max the game versus the movies. It shares values and lore with the movies in terms of the visual and thematic composition as well as plot tidbits and characters, but it's very choosy about what it wants and what it doesn't. I think it's actually quite clever in what it chooses to focus on, but if you're expecting it to be in the vein of Fury Road specifically, you're going to be kind of disappointed. There's a lot here from Fury Road, sure, factions, car designs, characters, but everything that made the movie such a good movie is absent, and absent by structural difference even before artistic choice. Fury Road, to me, is one of the best action movies of recent years on the strength and fluidity of its editing, firstly. Each frame is important, used for maximum effect. It's a movie of constant action, and its few moments of quiet are used for fantastic, understated character and world development. As an open-world game, the kind of momentum the movie had would be impossible, structurally impossible, to maintain. Same as if it had been a completely different kind of game, a linear action story. Would a 6-hour game be able to achieve the same incredible economy of action and visual exposition as Fury Road? I doubt it. Rounded up, every piece of Mad Max media that came before the game totals less than 8 hours. Mad Max the game, as I played it, took me 60 hours. This game has no real interest in Fury Road, besides its lore and iconography. Mad Max the game simulates a very specific portion of the Mad Max franchise, but it simulates that portion to absolute perfection. It simulates the first 45 minutes of The Road Warrior. All the things you actually spend time in the game doing, you'll see Max doing in The Road Warrior's first half. Getting into chases with hostile road parties, all of which pose a real threat to Max, scavenging gasoline and scrap from the crashed vehicles, investigating oddities on the side of the road, observing camps from a distance, trying to find a way in, waiting on the fringes until the right moment to turn things to his advantage. Mad Max the game is principally about what it is that Max does in the time between movies, the kind of free-form and aimless wandering and scavenging that occupied his time between his revenge against Toe Cutter's gang in the early Apocalypse first movie and the opening of the decidedly post-apocalyptic second film. One of the Road Warrior's most important conversations between Max and Pop Gallo when Max refuses to drive the tanker sets the whole conflict up really succinctly. Gallo asks, "What are you looking for? Come on, Max, everybody's looking for something. You're happy out there, are you? Wandering? One day blurring into another? You're a scavenger, Max. You're a maggot. Did you know that? You're living off the corpse of the old world." Gallo can't figure out why Max would place a higher value on the endless, hopeless scramble for the last drops of gasoline in an uncaring wasteland than on the concerns of real people. Neither can a lot of game critics, it seems. In the week since Mad Max was released, there's been a big to-do made about the gulf between positive player reactions and negative critical ones, with the principal beef revolving around the idea that critics didn't give the game a fair shake. I think that's a really bad framing of what's going on. What's going on is the same thing as that conversation between Gallo and Max. Mad Max, the game, is all about the open world, the sound of your engine and the crunch of the sand and all the blood and the fire and the endless sky. All the design effort went into what people are looking at as secondary tasks. The camps, the convoys, the hidden crevices that comprise the map's marked activities, which unwind like a spiraling ultraviolent checklist as you build the car. There is a plot, but there's not very much of it, and it's much too self-serious. If you think that a Mad Max game should focus on plot, should focus on how Max interacts with the people of the wasteland, you're seeing it from Gallo's perspective, and the game is going to come up short. All the power of that V8, what does Max do? He wastes it on nothing in a wasted land. If you think a Mad Max game should be more like a hypnotic, endless conveyor belt of broken bones and car parts, you're seeing it more from Max's side of that conversation, and will have a much better experience with Mad Max the game. The game could have gone either way, freeform open world or linear action, and had equally strong structures. But Avalanche, the developer, chose to focus on the open world, chose to make this a Road Warrior game and not a Fury Road game. That doesn't mean the critics who disliked the game are wrong in any way. They are completely right to say that this is a 40-plus hour experience almost exclusively about looking for car parts in the Forsaken Desert. It's just that not all critics and players will see that it's a negative, necessarily, especially when it comes to an official Mad Max title. It's not like consistency has ever been the Mad Max franchise's defining quality anyway, and nowhere do you see the highs and lows of Mad Max storytelling more than with Beyond Thunderdome, the third film from 1985. For pretty much 20 years before Fury Road, Thunderdome was the last piece of Max Media, and it was just not very good at all. Now, the first half hour of the movie is iconic. Bartertown, Auntie's job interview, Thunderdome itself, the break-a-deal, get-the-wheel trial, all of it's fantastic, classic Max. And then the movie inexplicably veers into a post-apocalyptic take on Peter Pan and never really recovers from it. Seriously, the opening lines of Fury Road might be, "My name is Max, my world is fire and blood." But the closing lines of Beyond Thunderdome might as well be, "My name is Max, and those little tucks were a right handful." And that was the last of Max for almost 2 decades. So Fury Road comes out, and it's a knockout, and people expect the game to be a knockout in the vein of Fury Road. It isn't. It is as surreal and inconsistent and intermittently obnoxious as Beyond Thunderdome, but by the same coin, equally as likable for the things that it does well. Its inconsistencies have a familiar, nostalgic feel to them. Fury Road is a lean, modern Max, well-edited, well-considered, whereas the game is just as bold and brash and questionable and lovable as Tina Turner's chainmail earmuffs in the '85 movie. This Max is more of that Max, 80s action Max, and is the stronger for it as a video game protagonist anchoring a 60-hour gameplay-centric experience. A lot of that strength, the majority of it, unhappily, is in the setup and early execution of the game and its systems. The game seems to take place after Fury Road. Immortan Joe and the Citadel are never mentioned, but his son, the ridiculously named Scabrous Scrotus, is alive and ruling Gastown. Max appears to kill him, and he appears to dismantle Max's interceptor at the beginning of the game, an even trade of disempowerment, particularly seeing as both of them get better by the end of the game. The setup is classic Mad Max. Everything is taken from you. Your car, your plan, your mind, and you have to try to bounce back. Max is trying to cross the Plains of Silence, which is not a real place, but a mythical place in Max's imagination, where he will be free from pain and from people. But he sees things in practical terms, even delusionally. He needs a car, and a nearby mutant mechanic just happens to have a pretty good one lying around. Also, like the Road Warrior, Mad Max the game gives Max a quirky, talkative sidekick. In the movie, it was Bruce Spence, the gyro captain. Here it's Chumbucket the mechanic, or Blackfinger as they have it out in the wasteland. Chumbucket has a deep spiritual practice revolving around engine maintenance. He believes Max is a saint of the Holy Angel Combustion, sent from the heavens to help Chumbucket build his magnum opus. Car, of course. If you're not familiar, magnum opus means great work, and it's used to describe a creative work of true genius that defines the artist's career. Building the magnum opus is Chumbucket's great technical and spiritual destiny. It's a wonderfully 70s way of looking at it. The first Mad Max movie came close on the heels of the 1974 bestseller Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, a book which uses small engine repair and the different bearings with which people approach repair as a means of exploring what grander philosophies look like on a practical level. It talks about how tuning an engine is about tuning the spirit as much as the piston. Engine diagnostics are about seeking an inner peace of mind, it argues. Keeping a machine running is devotional and meditative. I've experienced the feeling myself. Something about working on your own vehicle connects you to it in a meaningful way. Keeping old cars on the road is something of an act of will. Chum Bucket's religious devotion to automotive mechanics makes a lot of sense, and to someone who does amateur repair, seeing him build his magnum opus is deeply cathartic. There are some circumstances where Chum Bucket overstays his welcome, where his voice work is more obnoxious than entertaining, but not as many as I was worried about. Chum's a surprisingly believable character, and I really related to him on a number of levels. The magnum opus doesn't have a body on it when it's introduced. It's just a naked platform with a tiny engine, a blank canvas starting from absolute zero. That's why it's such a good hook for an open-world game. The car has such potential, and the path to fulfilling it is as quietly compelling as it is long. The game is ultimately more about this car than it is about Max himself. Your first order of business is to put a body on the frame, and you get a few to choose from. I liked most of them, although I felt like Shovelface, a Mustang-based look, is pretty boring, and that the furnish was a little cartoonish. Otherwise, they're great. You have a classic big-body Rolls-Royce, Max's iconic Ford Falcon, a 1930s coupe, and my favorite, a GTO body called the Ripper, which was a pre-order bonus. I wish you had a few more to choose from. A Lincoln Mark or a Cadillac coupe would have fit in particularly well, but with all the different upgrade components and the fact that you can find all the other car bodies out in the wasteland, the Opus is a car that never gets old, which is good. You spend damn near the whole game in it. The Magnum Opus is your tool, weapon, transportation, and companion. It has 18 different upgrade categories, from suspension, exhaust, engine, and other stats that affect driving, to armors and weapons, to decorative elements like paint and decals. The grand majority of them are purchased with scrap, the game's single universal currency, used for upgrades to both the Opus and for Max himself. In the early and middle game, the scrap economy actually works really well. The game world is filled with hundreds, and I mean hundreds, of optional side areas that have collectibles and scrap. Scrap always comes in the same bundle, an amount between 1 and 20. The Volition skill adds a few more bonus scrap on top when scrap is collected. Later on, rarely, you'll find scrap pallets worth 50 to 100. And you can also find or steal a vehicle called the Scrapulence, a light truck overloaded with scrap. Those fellas are worth a full 500 when you bring them to a stronghold, one of the game's quest hubs. There's also 2 ways to generate a scrap income. Every time you clear a camp, a crew from the nearest stronghold comes in and starts dismantling it, periodically providing 20 scrap per camp, no matter how small or large the camp you just took over is. Your maximum income from that, if you've taken over every camp in the game, is 740. Then there's the scrap crew. When the game is off, each stronghold scrap crew will generate up to 500 scrap, which you receive when you start the game up the next day. You could also count another project, the cleanup crew, which automatically harvests scrap from destroyed vehicles in that kind of income category. This seems like an awful lot of ways to get scrap. And it is, but it's a player economy that completely fails to scale along with the player. Upgrades are locked behind certain progress conditions, almost all of which are tied to wasteland activities and not to plot quests. Mostly, to unlock the upgrade tree, you have to reduce threat levels by completing your choice of activities, unless you want to reduce the threat level to absolute 0, which requires doing all of the activities. In the early game, it's a lot of fun. Progress is rewarded however the player chooses to progress, wherever they feel like going, whatever camps they feel like ransacking, whatever sniper towers they happen to be nearby and pull down. Early on, upgrades cost between 75 to 500 scrap for the most part, which is an easily achievable number if you're looting the optional locations on a regular basis. The first 2/3 of the Opus upgrade tree is a blast. To see the car go from unarmored rust bucket to a snarling death chariot in a matter of about 20 hours or so is fast, fun, fulfilling progression. And then you hit a major wall with it. To fully upgrade Max in the Magnum Opus takes around 45,000 scrap. 45,000. Now, most games have economies that scale with the player, defeat more powerful enemies, infiltrate better defended locations, receive more money with which you buy the more expensive later game goods. Scrap, and the units they come in the wasteland, don't scale. At hour 55, you are still collecting between 1 and 20 units of scrap plus your Volition bonus, just like you did in hour 5 of the game. You can go into a camp in an endgame zone, spend 15 minutes defeating the game's toughest enemies, and walk out with 50 scrap total, out of the 1,400 to 4,100 scrap you need for a single endgame upgrade. For upgrades that you can only unlock, actually, by doing literally every activity over 1/3 of the map area, even the activities that you find tedious as a player. The sense of true choice and freedom that makes the beginning and middle of the game so fun is absent in the latter third. Completionism becomes mandatory, first to unlock the upgrades, then to pay for them. I've already talked about how these side tasks aren't really side tasks, they're the primary focus of the game. Max, scavenging and the emptiness for scraps of food, scraps of metal, and scraps of his sanity is what the game is all about, what it accomplishes so brilliantly. You're experiencing Max's day-to-day life as a maggot on the corpse of the old world, as Gallo would have it. The early stages unlock rewards at a rate where you can choose whatever tasks sound appealing to you. When you're forced by the upgrade system to go back and systematically clear a checklist of identical activities off in literally every region of the map, you don't feel like Max, you feel like a temp at Max Corp. The worst offender by far is the minefield task, where you have to drive Chumbucket's buggy, the very first vehicle you drive in the entire game, all over the map, and clear 10 minefields per stronghold, with 3 hidden mines apiece. You have to follow the directions of a dog in the back of the buggy while you uncover each individual mine, get out, disarm the mine, get back in, and then do 2 more mines. To unlock all the upgrades, you have to find a mine, get out of the buggy, defuse it, and get back into the buggy 90 times total. It takes literal hours of your life. It's absolutely, positively infuriating. The thing about optional tasks is that they actually have to be optional in order to not overstay their welcome. A lot of people have been comparing this game to Far Cry titles, but I think its closest open-world relation is Red Faction Guerrilla. Mad Max is to cars what Guerrilla is to architecture, and each have a scrap-based economy and a control-based map. The thing to remember about Guerrilla was that you could reduce the control of a region to 0 without having to do literally everything. All you had to do was the majority of things. It made the tasks feel truly optional, and if there was a particular activity that you disliked, ignoring it was totally feasible while still fulfilling your gameplay and upgrade objectives. It was more casual, and more fun because of it. You cannot fully realize the magnum opus without spending a lot of time on what is genuinely, truly busy work. It is non-consensual completionism, and I ain't down with that. The frustrating thing about it is that you can tell they almost went in a different direction for unlocking in the player economy, a direction that would have suited the game much better. There are 3 upgrade components that don't involve scrap at all. You find them out in the wasteland and then they're just added to the upgrade list. The first is car bodies. When you first choose your Opus body in the Buzzard Graveyard, that's it for a while. But as you go out and you explore the map, you come across remote camps where the wastelanders have been tinkering with a usable body, which you can then mark with a flare and add to your collection, and then switch between them freely as you get bored of a look and want to try a new one for the Opus. Similarly, paint colors are only obtainable by fighting regional bosses called Top Dogs. The dumb thing is that each fight is exactly the same, literally the same. Each boss is the same model, with the only difference being the paint color smeared across their mask. They use the same tactics at the same pace. The arenas get mixed up a bit, and later battles throw in a lot more common enemies as well, but it is a weirdly cheap kind of thing for the game to pull. The Top Dogs even have unique character biographies. Why didn't they give them unique looks? Even if they hadn't mixed up the attack sequence, making them feel more distinct visually would have mitigated the immersion-breaking laziness of how the Top Dog fights turned out as it stands. Still, tying paint colors to the Top Dog fights is a positive thing. Each color represents a victory for the player, a yardstick of accomplishment and progress that makes the magnum opus feel fresh all over again. Similarly for the hood ornaments, these provide very minor bonuses to pretty much all of the different statistics of the opus, but only one stat at a time. You collect the ornaments by defeating convoys, which is by far my favorite activity in the game. Convoys consist of big fuel trucks protected by half a dozen or more escorts who all swarm and try to prevent you from getting within striking distance of the fuel truck. They're very difficult early on, but when you get the Thunderpoon, the opus's explosive missile, the playing field evens out a lot. The convoys combine everything that's really iconic about a Mad Max chase. High speed, long distance, with a ton of vehicles all neck and neck, with explosions, crashes, and spills on all sides. It feels the most like the movies, both the climactic tanker chase in the Road Warrior and the modern Fury Road-style chases. It's the thing where the magnum opus feels like it's really living up to its name and its purpose as well. The game's climax is even essentially an extended convoy mission. Avalanche knows that this is where the game is best. All these activities tangibly reward the player for their exploration and their participation. They feel worth the time to do. In the early mid-game, so do all the other side explorations and activities. But with all these obviously handcrafted optional locations, the only thing you get is a minuscule amount of scrap late in the game, especially relative to your time investment. Early optional areas are often deserted, quick to scout and loot. Later on, every goddamn outcropping is inhabited, and you'll be spending between 5 and 10 minutes fist-fighting and exploring locations for no more scrap than you would have gotten in 45 seconds closer to the game's opening. Had they chosen to tie upgrades directly to exploration, where you find the exhausts and the engines and the wheels inside the wilderness camps themselves, the game could have easily maintained the thrill of exploration, the sense of curiosity and time investment being adequately rewarded by the game's systems. Instead, the player is extremely aware of how little an impact on their overall upgrade progress a side trip will net them, and that discourages making the side trips at all, and makes the game feel like more of a burden than an escape. My first 30 hours with the game were amazing, and I had a few complaints. My next 30 hours were substantially less fun, and that's all on account of the player economy's baffling failure to adequately scale. These scaling difficulties would be less of an issue if upgrading the car wasn't also pretty much the plot of the game. The game actually has two conflicting plots, based on Max's two conflicting needs. One, where Max's only desire is to make the Opus powerful enough to cross the plains of silence, namely by finding a gigantic V8 engine, and another, where Max tries not to let down a mother-daughter pair, Hope and Glory, the same way he let down his own wife and child in the first movie. The former is a much better story than the latter. Early on, while discussing the future of the Opus, Max insists that it needs a V8. There's only one place in the wasteland that a fella can get the kind of engine that'll satisfy Max: Gastown, where a massive supercharged guzzler named the Big Chief awaits as a prize for whoever wins the dangerous Gastown races. The early story missions introduce you to all the leaders of the various strongholds, and by the mid-game your map is dotted with secondary missions that'll help the strongholds grow. A lot of these secondary missions are pretty outstanding in their setups and executions. For example, Gutgash is a guy whose followers think he's preparing a shipwreck fortress to float when the oceans come back one day. He isn't, really, but he does need raw, unrusted metal for fortifications. The only way to get it is by pushing a subway car out of its long-forgotten underground berth with the Opus, thrusting it out of the darkness and over a cliff to be picked up and cut apart. It's a great moment in scavenging. Or how about Pink Eye's plan for her people, constructing a wind-driven vehicle that collects dew in its sail and readying it for use? Eventually, you watch as the expedition is blown into the distance. Will they make it? Max is skeptical, but it's a fine side story, collecting the components and then launching the craft. One of the best moments of ruin delving in the game comes from a side mission, where you locate a church buried amongst the shifting sand dunes, which contains an intact food cache in the basement, along with a well-told environmental story about the refugee center's eventual downfall. All of the best stories in Mad Max the game are the minor ones, individual concerns with interesting and unexpected solutions that you scavenge and fight to achieve. They feel true to Max's character, mercenary and clever, but the game's climax is less about vehicles out of control than about Max's emotions being out of control, and it's just so bad. It is as inexplicable as Max taking a band of children to Morrow Land, and just as annoying. Maybe even more so, because it thinks that it's being all deep about Max. There's a lot of freedom in writing a Mad Max story. It doesn't have to strictly make sense, for one. From the Road Warrior forward, Max's stories have followed the rules of oral storytelling more than movie storytelling. The details are contradictory. How does Max have his interceptor at the beginning of Fury Road anyway? Because it's part of the legend. Why does he have his interceptor here in this game? If Max was a cop when everything went wrong, why isn't he an old man by now? The Road Warrior was years out from the fall of civilization, and Beyond Thunderdome seemed like decades. Fury Road feels like actual generations have passed, yet Max is still Max. In the game, he looks even younger than he does in Fury Road, let alone Beyond Thunderdome. Max is not a realistic character. He's a mythic character, and the details are not important. The Road Warrior and Beyond Thunderdome are also both framed by tribal narrators, the feral kid and the girl who co-leads the Oasis kids. Fury Road isn't explicitly set up as a legend being told, but it is mostly Furios's story, and Max disappears back into the wasteland like he does at the end of every movie at the end of that one, too. Another place you can spot the series' mythic frame is Bruce Spence's character in The Road Warrior, the Gyro Captain. He shows up again in Beyond Thunderdome, but it's a weird and awkward meeting. It isn't clear if they actually know each other or not. Of course, Max never told the Oasis children the story of the Road Warrior, so the narrator wouldn't know the connection between the two of them, so perhaps that's why it isn't there. Yet Bruce Spence's presence is felt again in Mad Max the game, even if Spence himself doesn't voice act. Instead, you get Jonathan Oldham voicing a character named Griffa, who happens to look exactly like Spence, sound a lot like Spence, and fulfills the same role of weird sidekick helper as the Gyro Captain, only in an explicitly mystical way. Griffa is like a shaman therapist for Max, and unlocks a separate upgrade tree where you turn in Griffa tokens in exchange for bonuses and efficiencies. Most of the conversations with Griffa are way too self-important, and I longed for just one moment when Griffa would channel the Gyro Captain and start going off about, "Remember lingerie!" But you don't get that. Not all of the exchanges are fluff, though. There are some that directly address the bizarre mythic inconsistencies of the story. "Where are you?" Griffa asks, and Max doesn't actually know. "How old are you?" Griffa asks, and Max doesn't remotely know. Eventually, as you max out your tree, Griffith comes around to explaining the truth of it to Max. These are his fabled plains of silence. Building the magnum opus to cross them, that's what he's already doing. The lonely scavenging, the wordless brawls, the miles and miles of sand and road, this is what he was looking for all along. Either he spends his time here, scavenging on the plains of silence, or he tries to rekindle his humanity and start anew. Option B is the only way he will ever reach the other side of the plains of silence and escape them. Hope and glory, the game's leading ladies, are his only shot at redemption. And there's the big misstep. In a franchise whose framing is so deliberately, exuberantly surreal, they chose the most cliché option possible for the main plot. In a couple other reviews, I saw people talking about how Mad Max the game has poor female character writing, particularly compared to Fury Road. I agree, but only if you're comparing it to Fury Road. Like I said, the Max in this game is 80s action Max, and the game's sensibilities towards its female characters is crafted from the same mold. The early movies didn't put their strong female characters right up front the way Fury Road does, but they did have worlds where women are as tough as men in the struggle to survive. A woman is one of the best fighters in the gas camp and the Road Warrior, and Auntie built Bartertown from the ground up and beyond Thunderdome. Fury Road had a more deliberately female-forward approach than the previous movies, but this game is not out of tune with the franchise's traditional respect for women's agency and competency. Hope does have agency in the plot. She engineers most aspects of her own escape, and even though she doesn't struggle as visibly against her given role as a prize and possession as the women of Fury Road, she does see herself as a person, deserving of more, and she works towards that. When I talk about games that have a problem with representing women, the problem often stems from treating them as props instead of people. Mad Max the game actually does a pretty good job of portraying women as human beings first and foremost. There's Pink Eye, for example, the wheelchair-bound, steely-eyed leader of the Northwestern Stronghold, the one who sends her people away on the sand ship. And there's Tenderloin, a Gastown fighter who emerges from the vapors of her huffing addiction for one beautiful, brutal shot at victory as Max's second in the Gastown races, and she's easily the most competent melee opponent that Max has in the game. Many of the random wasteland conversations are with women scavengers. The game doesn't have a problem with women in general, it just has a big problem with how Hope's character arc is completely uninspired, predictable, and vapid. Max meets Hope a few times before the Gastown races, but the races are where things actually get going with the subplot. Alongside the Big Chief V8 engine, Hope is one of the prizes for winning the races. If you've been doing her wasteland missions, you know that she's looking for an escape. She has you scout out supplies and a place where she can hide from her captors with her daughter. Yet it is Scabrous Scrotus himself, alive, after all, who comes down to give Max his prize when he wins the race, and Scrotus is not altogether too stoked that it was Max who won. So, a fight to the death, where neither of you die, and Hope escapes and saves Max's life. So now Max owes Hope, and Hope wants her daughter, Glory. So Max saves Glory from the buzzards, where they have her digging tunnels out of an airport long buried in the sand. That really isn't out of character. Max's kid, the feral kid, the kids in Beyond Thunderdome, Max is always saving kids, or at least trying to, whether he initially wants to or not. The thing is, Glory is just such a cynically empty character. Her only purpose is to be like, "Hey Max, wanna be my dad?" And they have like one conversation where he saves her before starting in on the "will you be my dad" stuff. But then when you rescue the girl, you lose the car. Chumbucket is run off with the Opus. Hope says, never mind the Opus, flee with her and Glory. Max says, the Opus comes first. Max doesn't realize he's choosing between them and the car, but he sure is. The climax is pretty bad, but not as hackneyed as the stuff with the Hope and Glory. But before we talk about the ending, I want to put its badness in perspective. The story is maybe 4 hours out of the 60 I spent with Mad Max the game. It is deeply frustrating that the story is so paint by numbers when there's so much else in the game that is genuinely artistic. Avalanche has accomplished with Mad Max one of the most gorgeous desert environments ever put in a game. The developers paid incredibly close attention to the way that the movies are shot, to the use of bright and vivid colors in the environments against the chrome and rust of the vehicles. I've never seen skies done quite as beautifully in a game as I've seen them done in Mad Max. The interplay of clouds, shadow, and quality of light all constantly shift over the day-night cycle, and the transition periods at dawn and dusk are outrageously beautiful. Mad Max pays more attention to the quality of the environment in the middle distance and far distance than most games as well. Certain roads are obviously meant to be scenic, but the way the hills and roads curve with mountains or dunes or open dry seabeds stretching out feel incredibly authentic. I've never been to the Outback, but I've traveled a lot in the American Southwest, and the deserts that they've created in Mad Max are true to the proportions and proclivities of actual desert. The wide distances, the way things decay slowly, the way sand shifts over the road, obscuring it. If they had removed the combat completely and released this as a rural desert byway simulator 2015, I would have been equally in love with the visuals. Mad Max is much more than that, of course. The fantastic look of the cars and the heavy, punchy, dangerous feel of the car combat really cranks up the charisma of the game. It's also incredibly immersive in its quiet moments as much as its loud ones. Idling on a hilltop, surveying a camp through the lens of your sniper rifle, the sun beating down on the exposed steel of the Opus, lining up a shot with a vulnerable fuel tank. It's a perfect, singular moment of the Mad Max aesthetic. And that's essentially what this game was created to do best, to create these individual moments of maximum max magic on demand, based on where the player feels like driving and what they feel like doing. There are tiny details, like footsteps and tire tracks you leave behind in the sand and visual damage you take on after beating all at the end of the Road Warrior, that really help bring home a sense of physical presence in the game world. Scavenging for water to replenish health and to fuel the Opus's tank was also a welcome addition. I actually wish fuel consumption had been a more pronounced mechanic in the game. As it stood, I mostly used the gas can you keep in the back of the Opus for blowing up doors in the camps, but refueling the Opus is a real great max moment as well, if a small one. And then there's the storms. I've seen other reviewers complaining about having to take shelter without seeming to realize that staying out in the storms is one of the most profitable moves in the game. Not only does blowing debris the size of houses shake up a car chase in a mightily entertaining way, but crates of scrap worth up to 150 scrap per crate blow about in the storm and even helpfully appear on your minimap. The way that the storms roll up on you, huge against the sky, and then engulf Max in the Opus is just so fun and so gorgeous that I'm really genuinely perplexed that people didn't care for the mechanic. The storms are amazing. The game, for the most part, is amazing fun. And it actually is a wonderful piece of post-apocalyptic media despite its occasional swerves in the opposite direction. The thing that really tipped the scales for me in terms of how Mad Max did its wasteland uniquely from other post-apocalyptic games wasn't the landscape or the detail of the design, it was the collectibles. The one trivial collectible you hunt for, and due to their triviality they really are optional, are historical relics, snapshots, notes, and postcards from the gone-away world. It's the inclusion of these relics and the way the game frames them as relics against a backdrop of intense mysticism and superstition that ties Mad Max very strongly to one of the founding pieces of post-apocalyptic media at large. Funnily enough, it's also by a Miller, Walter J. Miller, and his landmark novel A Canticle for Leibowitz. In it, centuries after a nuclear war, monks venerate the scraps left behind, the sacred shopping list, the holy blueprint. Nothing remains but these tiny flakes of lost humanity and civilization. Everything else is buried under the sand. Canticle for Leibowitz was published in 1960 and was a Hugo Award winner in addition to being a cross-genre hit. Canticle was widely read outside of regular sci-fi circles and was one of the first popular imaginative works to show the kind of sandblasted new Dark Age that you see here in Mad Max the Game in 2015. More so than even the Fallouts, the wasteland of Mad Max seems inextricably linked to Canticle's Ur-Wasteland by virtue of its inaccessibility of the past, and the uncommon power of these common objects so long after the world that created them died. The historical relics have a pull all their own. Alone, they're interesting. But when you combine them with the genuine beauty of the landscape and the fantastic subtlety in the details of sand and smoke, with the sounds of the wind in your engine, and this particular vision of the apocalypse becomes mesmerizing and unique, mesmerizing way beyond the triviality and repetitiousness of its individual tasks. Building the Opus is an epic task, and for the player it is an epic experience. Both in the Opus and on the ground, beating men to death for Polaroids and car parts. A lot of people have complained that the combat is another derivative, boring part of the game, but I loved it. I heard it was the same system as Shadows of Mordor and the new Batman games. Well, I didn't play any of those. I only know what I experienced here, and what I experienced in Mad Max was one of the best paced melee combat systems I've ever played. I usually don't care for brawling in games, since it seems so limited compared to weapons, but Mad Max makes fistfights incredibly visceral and frenetic while still making them easy to follow. The parry and counterattack moves were so easy to use, and switching between opponents is not only as smooth as silk, but often brutal and exciting. As you unlock more melee moves for Max, combat gets easier, but they throw more opponents at you, so defeating individual enemies quicker just preserves the pacing from the early game's fights. Scaling there, in the melee, is actually pretty well balanced. You'll max out Max long before you run out of things to do in the game, but ground combat remains beautifully fluid and fun throughout. It makes exploration, even the late game when you have to get into fights at every optional location, seem worthwhile. Instead, it is the story climax which makes it all seem pointless again. When Max goes after Chumbucket at the end of the game to get the Opus, he doesn't realize that Scrotus already beat him to the punch. By the time Max gets to the Opus, Chum has already told Scrotus where Hope and Glory are, and about Max's plans for a new family, and about Max's plans to abandon Chum. So Max races right back the other direction, but it's too late. Hope and Glory were murdered pretty badly while Max was away. Now, as far as Hope and Glory as characters go, it's dumb to have them be killed just as a means of making Mad Max really mad. But as a fan of the first movie, I did kind of enjoy the parallel. In the first movie, the origin story, Max's wife and child are killed by a motorcycle gang while Max is off, distracted, looking in the woods for what he thinks is the real threat. Devastated, he holds this rubber monster mask in his hands, getting angrier and angrier, and then he decides to let his anger consume him completely. Earlier in the movie, he had said that if he didn't get a break, there wouldn't be any difference between him and the crazies out on the road. He crosses that threshold. He steals the Interceptor, his iconic Interceptor, from Police HQ. Then he hunts down every last member of the gang and disappears into the wasteland. It's actually a really well-executed low-budget revenge flick, the first Mad Max. So on the one hand, Hope and Glory dying is a predictable and cliché move, especially after all the ham-fisted family building. But on the other hand, deliberately reconstructing these story beats from the first movie is actually a lot of fun and very nostalgic. The last mission, besides, is great. You pursue Scrotus's war rig in the game's biggest, deadliest convoy sequence. It's some solid, classic Mad Max, recreating the motivations, environmental backgrounds, and rhythms of the climaxes of both the Road Warrior and the original Mad Max. When you pull all the armor off the rig and blow its fuel tanks, the time of your revenge is nigh. Unfortunately, this is where the end of the game collapses in a way that damages player investment in literally everything else. Scrotus's rig is on the edge of a cliff. One good push will tip it over. But instead of doing this through gameplay, where you would let Chum repair the Opus and then ram away, the game insists, through the cutscene, that the Opus will be sacrificed to push the rig over the cliff. Chumbucket, of course, is wild with anger at the betrayal. This is his life's work, and it is the player's life's work as far as the game is concerned. I spent 60 hours, some hours of which I wasn't even having any fun with, in a desperate bid to reduce threat to absolute zero and unlock all the upgrades, building the Opus up to how it is now. And now the game says, destroy the Opus, and Chum along with it, for your revenge. It all happens so damn quickly, too. You're supposed to be playing as Max, and suddenly, at the literal climax, Max is doing something that the player knows very well doesn't even make sense within the game's systems. Those systems are just suspended for the sake of this cutscene, for the sake of what they wanted to do as a dramatic moment. So, you do that. You kill Chumbucket, you destroy his Opus, your Opus, and out of the back of the war rig pops Max's old car, the Interceptor, for a boss fight, for a really easy boss fight. It is a climax without drama. Video game nonsense mixed with self-serious presentation that makes expendable the player's entire game-long time and resource investment. So, obviously, Max beats the shit out of Scrotus one final time, and then he goes and he gets back in the Interceptor, he puts his family photo on the dashboard, right where he had it before, and drives off alone, leaving the Opus and Glory's snow globe and Chum's body in the dust. He's right back where he started. He's given up everything he had for revenge. And if that was straight up the end of the game, that would have been pretty alright. It's very in keeping with the tone of the franchise, at least. The thing is, following the credits, you're popped right back out into the wasteland, informed via pop-up message that all the dead characters have been made whole, and you can do whatever you like. So, if you finish the campaign early and had, 25 hours of content left over, you can go ahead and have at, with the knowledge that what you're doing has no impact or meaning in terms of the plot. You're just checking off boxes, upgrading a machine that you already saw die, officially. Everything that is artificial about Mad Max, and there's quite a bit, comes into sharp focus. It's like taking a haunted house and turning all the overhead fluorescent lights on. Yeah, all the stuff is still there, but the illusion is gone. An open-world game like this, especially with so much freeform content, has to make the player feel like they're doing things for more than arbitrary reasons. And prior to the climax, the game is actually pretty good about this. But Max destroys and forsakes everything for his revenge. I mean, that's thematically defensible. But to do that and then be like, okay, you keep having fun now, everyone's fine, and the time it takes for the credits to play, I mean, what the fuck? So then they give you some post-game prizes to make Max look more like the classic Road Warrior Max, like his jacket and his shotgun, and let you finish your checklists. That is the most disappointing thing about the endgame. The climax of the plot is the letdown, but accomplishing everything on the map doesn't net you anything more than achievements either. No character even says, "Hey, cool job, Max, thanks for doing so much stuff." All you do is unlock the last items of the upgrade tree, now that you've already done all the activities that you'd need the upgrades for, and know that the magnum opus is just going to be destroyed anyway. It's possibly the most singularly demotivational ending in an open-world game that I've ever seen, and that's why I wanted to talk about it. It's hard to talk about the totality of the game experience without reflecting on how self-defeating the ending is as far as the player's time investment is concerned. It is not enough to make me regret the time that I'd already spent with the game. The fact that this game is such an excellent max simulator makes up for a lot, but if I hadn't already finished everything, I know for a fact that I wouldn't have gone back to it. So I gave myself the ending that made sense to me as a player. I took the Interceptor, headed out to the edge of the map where the sand ship had launched, and drove out into the big nothing until I died. Game over. And game over is what Mad Max feels like in the end, even if it's a beautiful drive getting there. It is a truly mixed experience. There are things in Mad Max that are beautiful, unique, and new, especially in the art and the environment. And then there are things in Mad Max that are repetitive, low effort, and infuriatingly self-defeating, especially in the systems and the script. It's no wonder that reviewers can't make their minds about it. I love it, but I'm still having trouble assessing how much I love it. One thing is indisputable, though. It's a hell of a lot of Max for the money. Thanks for watching. This video, and all my other videos, are currently supported by people donating through Patreon. I'd like to take a moment and thank everyone for their incredible patience and generosity this last couple of months, and mention by name some of the people who are currently donating $10 a month or more. That would include Cassie, Chris Rosido, Ron Gervais, Christian Zacharianson, Pat Hay, Soeb Sheik, Balder Carlson, Dennis Clark, Nick Cole Hamilton, Douglas Griffith, Andrew Foltz, Kevin DeBolt, Jake Brennan, Ken Young, Signe Jensen, Dalton Seiler, Igor Babiuk, Maxwell Reed, Niles, Seth Downing, Justin Hughes, Ryan Gunst, Kumaran Villayan, Nobody, Devin Nold, Jared Meyer, Anthony Ruiz, Michael Atwell, Eugene Watson, Cameron, Alexander Leister, David Gilbreth, Trolls Katzberg Sigiet, I Cannot Fly, Wesley M., Aaron Albach, B-Tree, Alexander Heavens, Noah Duggins, Martin Karsten, Galak, Brett Gialmo, Morton Sconning, Fing Spencer, Andreas Larson, Camilla Lowry, Lars Ingvar Anderson, Preston Allen, Colin, Brad Carr, Ivan Marinov, Josh Farkin, Chris Larkey, Florence Abu, Aidan Ackley, Dan Reeder, Dewey, Annax of Rhodes, Niels Bach-Frummer, Spyro Sedaris, Rob Clark, Matthew Lagden, Harley McAvoy, Michael Gillis, Jump Kick Punch, Carl Gleason, Tim Marsh, Joshua Vivi, Tizar Vicarian, Irvin, Bradley Smith, Connor Biblo, Brad Wallace, Sigmund Copperwood, Stephen Lark, Amir Aguilar, Jeffrey Knutson, Pontus Paffenstiel, D, Hakan Sealeelu, William Kreutsch, Richard Stevenson, Kimmo Heikkinen, Joe Wolf, Sangustin, Oliver Handliken, White Zero, Stephen Rubio, Yuri Petnes, Sill, and Jonathan Fleikener. I really appreciate everything, all the donations that pour in. These are just a few of the people who are currently supporting me in these videos, and thanks for it. And thanks for watching, too.
I smoke cool stogies I have found, short but not too big around. I'm a man of means by no means, king of the road.
Hi, I'm Noah Gervais. In this video, we're going to be taking an extended look at the new Mad Max game. We're going to talk about it in terms of the movies that preceded it, and in terms of how it actually plays. It's been a divisive game with a lot of different mixed reactions, so we're going to try to figure out why those reactions have been so mixed. Let's get started. Mad Max has been influencing game design since long before the first official Mad Max title went into development. In many ways, the particular style of apocalypse that George Miller pioneered with The Road Warrior in 1981 is the default sensibility of most post-apocalyptic titles. Fallout, the first one from '97, is full of Mad Max references, right down to the design of the armors and some of the environments. Fallout 2's car, the Highwayman, would be right at home in Mad Max. Rage, id's most overlooked shooter, uses Mad Max-inspired costume and set design throughout. Even racing games, like the semi-open world Fuel, have taken cracks at the look and feel of Mad Max. There have been games with Mad Max in them for decades now, but not before right now has there been a capital-letter Mad Max game. and people's reaction to the game have been all over the map. Is this a fun, authentic expression of the series' iconic visual style, or is it a derivative mishmash of tired, overused gameplay cliches? The wide range of reactions to the game highlight its real struggle. It is both the idea that critics didn't give the game a fair shake. I think that's a really bad framing of what's going on. What's going on is the same thing as that conversation between Gallo and Max. Mad Max, the game, is all about the open world, the sound of your engine and the crunch of the sand and all the blood and the fire and the endless sky. All the design effort went into what people are looking at as secondary tasks. The camps, the convoys, the hidden crevices that comprise the map's marked activities, which unwind like a spiraling ultraviolent checklist as you build the car. There is a plot, but there's not very much of it, and it's much too self-serious. If you think that a Mad Max game should focus on plot, should focus on how Max interacts with the people of the wasteland, you're seeing it from Gallo's perspective, and the game is going to come up short. All the power of that V8, what does Max do? He wastes it on nothing in a wasted land. If you think a Mad Max game should be more like a hypnotic, endless conveyor belt of broken bones and car parts, you're seeing it more from Max's side of that conversation, and will have a much better experience with Mad Max the game. The game could have gone either way, freeform open world or linear action, and had equally strong structures. But Avalanche, the developer, chose to focus on the open world, chose to make this a Road Warrior game and not a Fury Road game. That doesn't mean the critics who disliked the game are wrong in any way. They are completely right to say that this is a 40-plus hour experience almost exclusively about looking for car parts in the Forsaken Desert. It's just that not all critics and players will see that it's a negative necessarily, especially when it comes to an official Mad Max title. It's not like consistency has ever been the Mad Max franchise's defining quality anyway, and nowhere do you see the highs and lows of Mad Max storytelling more than with Beyond Thunderdome, the third film from 1985. For pretty much 20 years before Fury Road, Thunderdome was the last piece of Max Media, and it was just not very good at all. Now, the first half hour of the movie is iconic. Bartertown, Auntie's job interview, Thunderdome itself, the break-a-deal, get-the-wheel trial, all of it's fantastic, classic Max. And then the movie inexplicably veers into a post-apocalyptic take on Peter Pan and never really recovers from it. Seriously, the opening lines of Fury Road might be, "My name is Max, my world is fire and blood." But the closing lines of Beyond Thunderdome might as well be, "My name is Max, and those little tucks were a right handful." And that was the last of Max for almost 2 decades. So Fury Road comes out, and it's a knockout, and people expect the game to be a knockout in the vein of Fury Road. It isn't. It is as surreal and inconsistent and intermittently obnoxious as Beyond Thunderdome, but by the same coin, equally as likable for the things that it does well. Its inconsistencies have a familiar, nostalgic feel to them. Fury Road is a lean, modern Max, well-edited, well-considered, whereas the game is just as bold and brash and questionable and lovable as Tina Turner's chainmail earmuffs in the '85 movie. This Max is more of that Max, 80s action Max, and is the stronger for it as a video game protagonist anchoring a 60-hour gameplay-centric experience. A lot of that strength, the road, besides its lore and iconography. Mad Max the game simulates a very specific portion of the Mad Max franchise, but it simulates that portion to absolute perfection. It simulates the first 45 minutes of the Road Warrior. All the things you actually spend time in the game doing, you'll see Max doing in the Road Warrior's first half. Getting into chases with hostile road parties, all of which pose a real threat to Max, scavenging gasoline and scrap from the crashed vehicles, investigating oddities on the side of the road, observing camps from a distance, trying to find a way in, waiting on the fringes until the right moment to turn things to his advantage. Mad Max the game is principally about what it is that Max does in the time between movies, the kind of free-form and aimless wandering and scavenging that occupied his time between his revenge against Toe Cutter's gang in the early Apocalypse first movie and the opening of the decidedly post-apocalyptic second film. One of the Road Warrior's most important conversations between Max and Papagallo when Max refuses to drive the tanker sets the whole conflict up really succinctly. Gallo asks, "What are you looking for? Come on, Max, everybody's looking for something. You're happy out there, are you? Wondering? One day blurring into another? You're a scavenger, Max. You're a maggot. Did you know that? You're living off the corpse of the old world." Gallo can't figure out why Max would place a higher value on the endless, hopeless scramble for the last drops of gasoline in an uncaring wasteland than on the concerns of real people. Neither can a lot of game critics, it seems. In the week since Mad Max was released, there's been a big to-do made about the gulf between positive player reactions and negative critical ones, with the principal beef revolving around of these things. A Mad Max title that uniquely translates what I've always loved about the franchise, arranged around gameplay systems that become less and less functional over time. It's one of the most beautiful games I've played in many ways, and the things that it does take time with, the incredible detail of the game world, are incredibly compelling. But you have to know what to expect with Mad Max the game versus the movies. It shares values and lore with the movies in terms of the visual and thematic composition as well as plot tidbits and characters, but it's very choosy about what it wants and what it doesn't. I think it's actually quite clever in what it chooses to focus on, but if you're expecting it to be in the vein of Fury Road specifically, you're going to be kind of disappointed. There's a lot here from Fury Road, sure, factions, car designs, characters, but everything that made the movie such a good movie is absent, and absent by structural difference even before artistic choice. Fury Road, to me, is one of the best action movies of recent years on the strength and fluidity of its editing, firstly. Each frame is important, used for maximum effect. It's a movie of constant action, and its few moments of quiet are used for fantastic, understated character and world development. As an open-world game, the kind of momentum the movie had would be impossible, structurally impossible, to maintain. Same as if it had been a completely different kind of game, a linear action story. Would a 6-hour game be able to achieve the same incredible economy of action and visual exposition as Fury Road? I doubt it. Rounded up, every piece of Mad Max media that came before the game totals less than 8 hours. Mad Max the game, as I played it, took me 60 hours. This game has no real interest in Fury